Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with Tyler Erickson. Tyler is a magic coach, an underground magic coach, and it takes a little bit of putting your ear to listen in a little closely to start realizing that his name pops up everywhere, and that's because he has helped so many magicians with their magic. He works on the methods, on the presentations, on the performance, on the practice, on the scripting, and there is no holds barred in this episode. He really answers everything, and you're going to learn a ton. Specifically, watch out for when he tells you the primary thing that he might go to when talking with a magician about their presentation and talking with a magician about their method and effect. I think you're really going to love this episode, and if you don't take at least 5 amazing things from this episode, then you literally weren't listening hard enough. It is action-packed, and you're going to love it. Here it is, a wonderful time with the one and only Tyler Erickson. Hello, friends, and welcome to Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and we are here with the one and only Tyler Erickson. Tyler, how are you?
I am well.
I'm super excited to have you on. You're one of those people who keeps getting mentioned. Oh, Tyler Erickson. And it's like, who is this guy? And then you find out that you're underground. You know, you're not like all over the internet like many magicians are. And you're a magic coach. You've worked with some incredible magicians, and you think quite deeply about your magic, which is always an exciting type of person to get on the podcast. So really excited to have you here. And let's start at the very beginning. How did you get started in magic? How did magic find you?
I was bitten by a radioactive magician. I got started in magic. This is, I think, a little different than the average story because Dan Watkowski, I think, is the magician that saw fit to put magic tricks into Cheerios boxes. I was at my friend's house. We were watching Saturday morning cartoons like he used to do back when they only came on at a certain time. And he dug this thing out, and it was a version of the grandma's necklace principle, which is 2 strings running through something that ultimately they would penetrate through. And long story short, the whole secret of the trick is in the setup, which he proceeded to do right in front of me. So I watched him set it up, then I watched him do it, and then I turned right back to Bugs Bunny, as one does when one is unimpressed. But by Monday, come into school, there's this huge crowd of people gathered around what I assumed was a fight. I get in the middle, there's my friend, he's got a tube and a couple of strings, and I think to myself, hey, I think I want a lot of attention just like he's getting. So, told my mom, hey, I think I might be interested in magic. She got a book from the library. It was the Eldon Magic Handbook, The Magic Handbook. A fantastic first book, by the way. I got super lucky, because had I gotten one of those other ones with a 1 picture every 5 pages, I probably wouldn't have continued. So I got books from there, and then there was something called the Arrowhead Interloan Library System. So I'd get books mailed to me, because I lived way in upper end Minnesota. So 40 acres of swamp surrounded by farmland. So books in the mail coming from Duluth, and they were fantastic. I was able to get a hold of Greater Magic, which we tend to think of as a singular volume, was broken into 4, and 3 of the 4 were at that library.
So help me along more of the journey, especially because you were all alone in the swamps of Minnesota getting books mailed to you. How did you start discovering the world of magic and magicians?
After the books, and again, I think you had a podcast with Tony Chang, and he said, nobody told me it was hard. And I was like, yep, that's exactly what it was. I was reading Modern Coin Magic and working on my Downs poem and stuff, and when I got to my first magic shop, I'd already been in magic for about a year. And so when you show someone what ultimately, looking back, was a pretty garbage vanish, but you were putting it in a Downs poem, they were impressed because they'd never tackled anything like that, because their first coin trick was something like Scotch and soda or nickels to dimes, a mechanical trick where, not that there's anything wrong with the tricks, but that it's not sleight of hand, and therefore there's less effort involved in learning it. I had learned how to do some sleight of hand and just assumed that was the way. And after being in magic for about a year, I became aware that about 100 miles south of me were a couple of magicians by the name of Terry Roses and John Bushy. And they were performers, and John was an escape artist, Houdini collector, a pretty famous one. He passed a couple of years ago. He was very strict, just like straight out of the dojo, smack you on the hands with the rod kind of strict. Not quite that far, but for the painting of the picture, we'll say that's what it was like. And he was connected to Mark Mitten. Mark Mitten, arguably one of Slidini's best students. And so I was getting like, what would be secondhand, third-hand Slidini information. And so that was nice. And then Terry Rose's, whom, how to paint a picture of Terry. Terry would be a man who in his earlier days might have done some crossroading. I'm not saying he did. I'm not saying he didn't, but that might have happened. And then later on in life became a consultant for the FBI and various casinos, and now does things along those lines. And so very deep into the gambling world. And for those people whose names you would associate with that world, like Steve Forty or whatnot, they're going to know Terry. Terry is kind of on the inner hub. So another kind of underground name. He's shown up in exactly 2 of the books that I own. One is the Darwin Ortiz book, the annotated Erdnase, and then Card College. And in both cases for his work with riffle stacking.
So you started working with the 2 of them? You started together, separately? Was there something regimented?
Yeah, they were kind of a tag team. John was my formal mentor. I paid him for exactly 2 lessons before they started to become free. There's a third guy whose name I should throw in the mix, Pete Golden. He had this phenomenal library of books that would not necessarily show up at the library. So once you transcended the library's books, you now got into that. And so I had full access to the Tarbell course, to Rice's Encyclopedia of Silk Magic, and a lot of the classic texts. Now, Pete wasn't a sleight of hand fella himself, but he was super generous. I mean, you figure I lived 100 miles away, and he would loan me stacks of books for months at a time and just say, write them down so I know what you've got. Doesn't know me from Adam, but here we are.
Wow, that's crazy. That's really generous for... So I'm assuming you were a kid or a teen at the time?
Yeah, I got started in Magic at 14 or 15. I should really go back and figure it out exactly, but somewhere in there.
So you mentioned that you were working with the 2 of them together, kind of like a tag team, and we'll kind of fast forward to the future a little bit later, but just so people understand, you're a Magic coach now, which means that kind of like mentoring and helping you grow has been ingrained in you for a little while. And something that I've been thinking about recently is that there are so many different ways to learn Magic. You can read books, you can watch like videos and DVDs and downloads and things like that. You can like go on Google and YouTube and just get as deep as your clever keyword searching can get you, or you can work alongside other magicians. And while they all have their own pros and cons and benefit, whatever, really there is nothing like getting feedback immediately as you're doing it, like critical feedback, having someone point you in the right direction, save you literally years of your life, where other people, like I know it took me years and years before a really wise magician said to me, Jonah, stop buying tricks, start buying books. And that, had someone said that to me earlier, I would have saved probably 7 years and a couple $100. So I think there's a real advantage to working with people. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that played a role in your journey?
Allow me to talk about how you can't change the timeline, and that were you to shoot someone back to your early beginnings and say, Jonah, don't buy tricks, buy books, you would say, what do you know?
Right.
And
you know what? I'm sure.
Tricks. And I think, it's funny to say, but it's also a truth that the classic saying of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear isn't saying that teachers just magically manifest themselves like Nightcrawler, poof, into your immediate vicinity. Right. It's you're surrounded by people that can teach you, but it's only once you have your eyes open to what they have to give that conversation starts. And so I can think of all the times when someone was trying to give me something valuable and I just couldn't see it until later on. And one of the easiest ways to prove this to yourself is with a book, because you'll read a book and you go, oh, what a great book. And then you set it on the shelf, and then 5 years later you read that book and you're like, whoa, what a great book. And it's suddenly, there's things in there that weren't there before. Someone has gotten into this book, has put more lines in there, because clearly you put your face in this direction and looked at these words before, and they didn't say that last time. You have to come back to these sources of information and give them another shot, and that's really one of the joys of books, is it's permanently there, and you can judge where you are by how you relate to this book, provided it's a good book. And you can kind of know what's a good book based on what is proven to be a classic. Go into what defines a classic later on. As
just a dummy takeaway all the time that I always like to bring up is there's an old book sitting on your shelf that you've been telling yourself that you love, but you haven't read in 15 years. And like, it's such a great practice to just go pull one of those off the shelf. And not only do you get all the dopamine of nostalgia, but you also really get to see it in another light again and really get to see the things you didn't, and what entire chapter gave you one lesson. Now you realize about the 9 others that you missed. And so it'll happen again when you pick up the book again in 10 years.
The horrible thing about this podcast is knowing how finite it is and just feeling this iceberg of information that I would love to dump on you about how to go about doing these things. So my mind is always like, what is, might be analogy time. What is the biggest rock in the jar? So teacher comes into the room, has a big jar. It is empty. And he proceeds to fill it with these large stones. Says, can I get any more into there? They say no. He says, hold on. And it comes out smaller stones. They go in between the large stones. The students are dutifully impressed with their ignorance, I suppose. And then the question comes, can I get any more into the jar? And they're like, well, maybe. And they say, yes. And sand goes in, and sand fits between the big rocks and the small rocks. And then finally, could anything more go in? And they say, yes, just because they assume the answer is probably yes. And you're right, and puts water in, and water goes in and fills in between the granules of sand. And the question becomes, now, what do you think this represents? What do you think I'm trying to tell you? Student's hand goes up and they say, no matter how much you're doing, you can always do more. And the teacher says, well, that's a very good guess. I was looking for, put the big rocks in first. And so forevermore, since hearing that story, you will hear me refer to the big rocks. And it is very, very common in magic conversations, whether they take place on a forum or live or online, for people to get caught up in minutia. It's really your job to think, is there a way for me to get further upstream on these ideas so that I can grasp onto a large concept that will affect everything downstream? And when you get caught in someone's conversation, they're like, okay, well, I'm doing this card thing. What's going to happen is I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this and that. And so I'm wondering now, how do I get the card to the bottom and reversed and then over here? And your gut level instinct is to start throwing out ways that you can get to that position. This happened to me when I was at Fector's. There was like 7 guys all gathered in a circle, and one of them is going to be on television, and he's doing this thing, and he's putting it together, and everybody's shouting out these ideas. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, what's the plot again? Right. And when it was said out loud, I just thought, that's not good. That's really like, you're working very, very hard for a plot that is not really going to
nonsensical.
I don't think it's going to have the impact. Like, it will play up to a point, but it won't validate all the work you have put in. And I have industry standards that kind of are placeholders in my head. So I go, well, how does it compare to, say, Invisible Deck? How does it compare to Ambitious Card or Coins Across or Sponge Balls or any of these things that we know to kind of have lasted through different decades of time or even centuries of time through different performers in different places on the planet? And if this thing you're mentioning just sounds like it can't swim with the big boys, then I am not going to dump my time into trying to polish that turd. That is my my New Year's resolution that I took years and years ago of just, I'm going to try and make sure that every time I apply my energy, I can see the value right now, as opposed to just feeling like there's value in thinking about a thing.
That's a really resonant lesson to think about, particularly from a magic coach. I want to return back to talking about working with other magicians and maybe some of the valuable parts of it, and also some of the pitfalls for somebody who's working with another magician early or working with coaches or mentors or something like that. Because that's something that we've seen a lot of many years ago. I think it's kind of fading. It might be coming back in many ways, but we heard so many people that went on the road with this magician for like 20 years, and now they're also amazing because they did the same thing. And we don't see so much of that here in Spain a little bit, but I'd love to know what your thoughts about the pros and cons of that sort of way to learn magic is.
I'm going to create fictitious mentor X. I am real mentor T. Fictitious mentor X has his own school. Like I am Muay Thai and he is Taekwondo. There are vast differences between my style and his style. But the truth is, when you come in as a beginner with no knowledge, if both of us are reasonably good, not great, not the best, not top of the world, but just reasonably good, the advice we give you on how to practice and how to tie things together will transcend any given form. And so when you work with a mentor, if the mentor is any good at all, what they usually lead with is, show me what you're currently doing. Right. And then, and this is a process I learned from watching Al Schneider teach, which I think is just a genius way. But you watch the person, you make a decision. What is the worst thing they're doing right now? What part of this thing is hurting them the most? Work on that first.
Right.
And then once they have some understanding as to this thing that they're doing and have been able to adjust it. And again, you don't need them to be perfect. Like, let's suppose when the person performs for you, they rock back and forth because they're nervous and they don't know what they're doing. And you're like, look, for everything that we can do to fix your sleight of hand, if you don't stop rocking, it's going to ruin everything you do. Right. So we just kind of need to look at that. Does that mean that person has to never rock again? No. It means they need to have some level of awareness that this is a thing they do, and to periodically come back and watch themselves on video and see if it's still happening. But then you can move on to the next thing to fix. And when you work with a mentor, it's a matter of them seeing what you are doing. Also in that process, they'll see what you like to do, so they'll have some sense of your passion. And then a good mentor tends to capitalize on what you are good at and where your passion is and push you in those directions. Because we all know those times when you've been in school and they're trying to teach you something that you see no relevance in, but they tell you you need to be able to diagram a sentence. And so you begrudgingly, okay, but a little, and you hate it. Well, that's not a good way to teach. You have to find a way to show the student the value of what they're going for. And the easiest way to do that is see something that they already love. Like if they love visual magic, then say, okay, based on what I know of good structure, what are good visual magic type things? Let's bop them over there and let them pick some of those things out. And then you can say, see, this visual thing here is incredibly complex, it's fickle, it's not trustworthy, and it's got bad angles. This visual thing over here is very practical, has an instant reset and plays to about 180 degrees, which, while not surrounded, that's pretty good. And so you don't just say, you can't do that. Don't ever do a snap change, because giving advice, don't do this, rarely works. And I tell you this now, having 25 years of, in one form or another, investigating. Can I just say, don't do this particular move because it's garbage? and the answer is, for the most part, nobody will listen to that. Even if they love you as an instructor, they will continue to do it because it's neat. You have to do replacement therapy. You have to say, okay, I know you really love this technique, but if you do this over here, look at the difference between the two and see if you can feel a difference in one being better than the other. And if you can't, then no problem. Keep doing what you're doing. But from my vantage, I see this as being the superior way. And so you're just trying to put it out there, and some people will listen and some people won't, and that's okay. But you have to provide the alternate. You can't just say, hey, stop doing that thing, that's ugly.
I compared the different ways of learning magic. You can learn alone, with books, with videos, online, in the myriad of ways. And then you could learn from somebody directly. What are some of the immediate pros and cons there that come to mind about why maybe everybody should work with a coach, or the opposite, why you have to be ready to work with a coach or something to that end?
I'll make the case for the coach, and this will sound awful self-serving, but honestly, I don't have to be your coach. Just someone should be your coach. And it goes like this. No video, no book, no trick in a bag is going to see you. It is this thing that has been created with the belief that whoever's on the opposite end of it is capable of doing what they ask in one form or another. When you have a mentor, you have someone that sees you, Jonah, show me. And then you do it. And now what you have done is the representation of you. And that is the value. And you really want to make sure whenever you have some sort of mentorship relationship that you are capitalizing on the fact that there are eyes in front of you that aren't your own. You're not watching yourself on a video or in a mirror. Someone who doesn't necessarily know what's coming next is watching you and is making decisions as to how deceptive this is and what could be better. Now, I'll make a case for the value of books and videos. If you could see me right now, I'm sitting next to my bookshelf of somewhere near 600 books. And they're not arbitrarily chosen, like these are the books that I decided I had to have. There's plenty of that, it's pretty good, but I don't have to have it. And I've read a good chunk of them. Many of them have been reread. And yet, I'm not one of those guys who says, oh, only books. Books are the way to go. Only books. Oh, learn the past from a book. No, absolutely not. Because I remember spending years seeing pictures of the past in different texts, good texts, things like Amateur Magician's Handbook and Tarbell and other places, and having literally no idea, not only how does this thing look, but what angle are they supposed to be looking at the hands from? Like, I couldn't even decide on what the audience's view was. There's always the same 3 pictures, and none of them made any sense to me. And after watching one video, I went, oh. For those listeners that have grown up into the age of the internet, where streaming video is they're like a snap of the fingers, they don't know that kind of pain of just having no reference point to these things. But books for physical technique are difficult. Now, if you're from my generation, that's all you had. You found a way to make it work, and then maybe you developed this relationship to it like, no, man, it's good for you to have to figure it out from written words. But I don't believe that. Maybe for some people, but when it comes to physical, what does it look like? What's the motion in 3-dimensional space? It is good to have a visual reference point. I think that is faster. But books are very good about providing detailed information that oftentimes gets glossed over on video, because the person, and I remember this vividly from a guy illustrating a classic force on the Greater Magic video libraries, was be like, well, you just do this. You just do this, and it would classic force on the guy who's interviewing. And the guy says, wow, that's really great. So what do you do? And the guy's, you just do this. So, not exactly what we call stellar breakdown of technique. And, you look into card college, and here's page after page of here's the psychology and the timing, the shifting of weight and shifting of tension between 2 people and all that. You're like, okay, that gives me at least some place to start with what's going on in my inner monologue. I love video for being able to see it, and I love books for being able to really dig deep. And a lot of times books give you insight into the psychology and other aspects that maybe aren't interesting for video. And people leave it out either accidentally or on purpose because it doesn't carry well on the medium.
I want to talk about kind of general advice. And I don't know if this is even a possibility or if it even works that way, because I know that obviously each person is different and each person has strength and each person has weaknesses. But if somebody wants the kind of flavor of the kind of coaching or the kind of pointing in the right direction that you or another coach might give, what kind of things immediately either are your go-to questions for them to ask themselves, go-to common errors that people are making? If you had one thing to yell at the magicians about, let's start with presentations, what would that one thing be?
The word that dominates all of my conversations, and it's not going to matter whether it's sleight of hand or presentation or anything else, is context. You have to look at the context of, in this case, you're asking me about presentation, of where you're performing. So just a real quick breakdown. If I am performing on a stage lights, theatrical seating, it's pretty much a given that when I talk, I'm the only one talking. And when I stop talking, no one else will start, because that's how theater works. And if I then shift myself into a living room, people are sitting on a couch, I'm standing in front of them, putting on a little show, it is more likely that someone may say something, yet still they will be holding themselves back more because it's clearly a show, albeit in a living room. And then one more step removed, it's you across from 1 or 2 people at a coffee shop, maybe formally, maybe not, and it's highly likely that they will now talk to you and go back and forth, and any space you make will then be taken up by someone else jumping in and saying some words. And when you think about presentation, we often think in terms of a script. These are the words that I say. But I, much as I hinted to earlier, like to look upstream and look at what is the general tone I'm trying to create here. What is the general flow? Because if I imagine myself on a stage alone speaking, well, that tells me a certain kind of script that I would write. But if I'm imagining myself sitting in a coffee shop performing casually, that is an entirely different thing. Even if the trick remained the same, the way in which I interact with this audience has to adjust. And as an analogy, if you can imagine, okay, you're a young man and you're looking to pick up a woman. So you're at the dance club and the music is thumping and you make eye contact with someone, and the level of conversation you have is going to be short, punchy phrases, probably accompanied with some gesturing, right? So, hey, you like the music? I like your shirt. But if you take that same person, same 2 people, you and her, somewhere else, like a coffee shop, and tried to hold the same conversation the same way, you would look like a weirdo. If you can't see the countervailing forces impinging upon you as you attempt to connect to other people, you're really setting yourself up for failure.
Now let's talk about the same thing method-wise. If there's something, again, that immediately comes to mind, what kind of thing would that be?
You know, the mark of a good speaker is the ability to be concise. And so I'm going to tell you right now, what I'm about to say I feel has value. I am not going to be particularly concise. I'll do my best. But again, context is everything. I feel like regular people are smart. My sister is 4 years older than me, only sibling, graduated the bar first time through, so she's a lawyer. And I feel like as a teenager learning magic, the last thing she wanted to be is the older sister that couldn't figure out the younger brother's magic tricks. And so there was a full-on onslaught to take me apart at any performance I would be dumb enough to put in front of her. And so I learned early on what smart people think and when they say it out loud to your face, and what things will typically get by and what won't. So what happens? People are suspicious that your things are fake. Fake cards, fake coins, fake cane, whatever. And having the understanding methodologically that if you lead with something that no one can examine, that could very well be a problem. Or if you end with something that can't be examined, even bigger problem. As far as sleight of hand goes, I'd recommend that you remove your ego from the process, because a sleight is only good if it goes undetected. It's not good if they're like, boy, I really like the way you tried to do that one-hand top palm. That's not good. In fact, I have this burning chunk of me where I did a card through handkerchief routine that involved palming. And the response I got from what is now my brother-in-law at the time, boyfriend of sister it was, that was really great. I couldn't even see that card in your hand, which is usually not the way you want your palming to be assessed. And so to go back to tie this all in a nice little bow, for somebody who's learning method, recognize that you don't get any points for trying something hard. It's, did it work? Did you get to the end and a person doesn't know what you did and they feel like there is no answer, because it's not just they don't know specifically what you did. They go, oh, I figured you must have just switched it when I wasn't looking. If you didn't do a good job making sure they were looking so they can't dismiss it like that, well, that's a problem too. So just looking for things that are well structured and not taking on sleights or not putting sleights in front of people that aren't ready for viewing yet. I feel like very, very often in magic discussion, we end up presented with a binary choice of does it fool them or does it not fool them? Oh, this gets by them. And we've already made this blanket statement of them. And people there are them, but they're also the individuals. And so I always look at like a spectrum, like a percentage. Okay, when I do it this way, I'm fooling 70% of the people and 30% of the people are just being polite. But if I do it this way, now maybe I'm 85% or whatnot. When you aim to fool the smartest people, you are also fooling the people that are less smart. So you're not losing anything by aiming there. When you aim to fool magicians, you take on methodologies that might not fool regular people. So to me, that is a subversion of effort. If you want to be a magician fooler, fine. But if you're looking for maximum returns for your energies, concentrate on being able to do something so well that a magician wouldn't recognize it for what it is.
I think to myself, like, of great performers whose magic is just as entertaining and fooling for a room full of magicians as it is for a room full of lay people. I wanted to return to talking about scripting. This is one of the areas where it's like endless headbutting of you must script, you shouldn't script. And I've kind of gone back and forth in many ways. And I think part of the way that it comes down to for me is like process. So I think the argument for scripting is really an argument for spending time working, thinking about what you're going to say, thinking about what you could say, and having an actual process that helps you go from trick to performance. Whether that's a word for word script or whether that's jotted notes or whatever, I think has to do with the way that people learn. And I think that might be unique to each person. But I think the argument for scripting is more an argument for like, stop not working on the most important part of your magic and work on it and then implement it in the best way possible. Can you shed light on your views of scripting?
I'm always cautious about anything that would say like a moment ago, the most important part of your magic. And I feel like it's like a spider saying, okay, I'm going to catch a fly because I just crap out this one really perfect piece of web, just this one strand here, but look how thick and sticky it is. That your performance is this interlaced network of method and presentation and tone and spontaneity and being in the moment and environmental concerns and all that kind of thing. And so your ability to have a small amount of knowledge in all of these areas, a general understanding of presentation, a general understanding of methodology, a general understanding of timing and body language, a general understanding of impromptu and being able to take advantage of the environment, a point I'd like to come back to later for close-up. And all of that together will have a synergy as opposed to taking one thing and looking at it. And I guess the bodybuilder analogy is the one I come back to all the time. It's if you go into the gym and you work and you work and you work to give yourself these giant arms, but we can always see all of you. You're not allowed to hide behind sweatpants.
Right.
And when you step out in front of people, it's equally likely that they'll go, geez, look at those tiny legs. It is the combination of that which you have made strong that in fact points out where you are weak. So I absolutely agree that presentation is important. But if I have wonderful presentation, but my technique is garbage, and someone says, well, I can see you there, right? So that's a problem. But if I have wonderful technique, but my presentation is just mumbly mouth garbage, that's going to be a problem too. And so it is this idea of training things in tandem and deciding, okay, I don't need it to be perfect, but where do I start? And what is a good core to then build on? So as far as scripting is concerned, you're right. There's going to be 1,000 different opinions. And it's not that they're wrong. It's like blind men describing the elephant. Because some people are looking at scripting through the eyes of the stage magician, in which case, critical. Because if you stop talking, nobody comes in to save you. And yet, if you take that same approach to close-up, where you're interactive strolling, you look like a jerk. You're this train on a track with no room for anyone else to interact with you. And people just go, okay, I guess he's just going to be the guy that talks. And that's not great either. Right. So when you go about designing your script, it's probably best that you have, just like if you were telling a joke or putting together a story, you have a sense of, okay, what is this meant to do? I always start with tone. Is this meant to be fun? Is this meant to be deep? Is this meant to be playful? What do I want to have out of this? Because once I know the tone, that tells me, am I going to write a lot of jokes? Am I going to leave a lot of space for someone to then come in and put themselves into it? And it helps. It gives you the pieces with which to play with so that you're not doing all of this turd polishing, where you kind of
I love that.
Automatically decided this is the way things get presented, so I guess I'm Ricky J now. And it's not at all who you are, but that's the example in front of you, so that's all you know. Starting with tone is a really good way to quickly shortcut around the boondoggles of writing for a character that you don't want to be.
I know that if I don't decide on the tone of what I'm doing, then I end up being another person. Like I swallowed a local magician who I really love, and now I'm just speaking as if I'm him. Or I swallowed a Spanish magician, and now I'm making weird noises with my mouth. And it all comes from not being sure or not deciding what direction you want to take something. And I've had full script change 180, none of the same topics or subjects, but the tone and the tension and the pacing basically stays the same. And and I think it's arrows pointing in the direction of the importance of, first of all, location. You know, are you on stage? How are you interacting? Like, are you thinking people are going to cut you off or not? Then tone, and then of course you can start getting into the nitty gritty of the words. I wanted to talk a little bit about the contents of a script or of the words that you're saying. I agree so much about, the context matters of where you're performing, with whom you're performing for. But I also have kind of gone on a journey myself over the past maybe year and a half about the actual content of the words that I'm saying. And I started maybe, let's say 2 years ago, where I was much more focused on just not explaining the trick play by play, but focused on the clarity of the effect. And in that, I was performing more and more, and many people in my circle were performing the kind of magic which was about something. They would tell a story, they would relate it to people, and I started doing that for a little while. And then after a little while, I kind of felt like I was a magician pretending to be a storyteller, when in reality I'm a magician. So I've started to return back to the old ways, which again isn't that play-by-play, like I'm going to put it in the deck, but it is like focusing on the clarity, because like what are we doing here? Like we're doing magic. So obviously there's no right answer. It's different for each person. But I know, because you've worked with many people, that definitely those two schools of thought have pulled in other direction. Do you have any commentary or thoughts on it?
When it comes to stories, take a moment and say, if I woke up and I had no knowledge that I had done magic, everything that I'd ever purchased had been wiped away, every book, every sleight that I knew, gone. How many stories do I tell when I'm in a room where people look to me as like, hey, why don't you fill some time? You could tell a joke, you could tell a story, you could do something. Are stories something that I enjoy and that I want to be the teller of? That is the starting point, because you should never feel obliged to do this thing. I have to do this because somebody said I do. If you can't feel the truth of it in your heart, then you have to wait. And I like stories, as you can probably tell just from the podcast. And as a communicator, analogy is a powerful way to get people to understand certain concepts. And when you're a trainer, you start to develop analogies. And over years, you almost start to talk of them. It's like that Star Trek Next Generation episode, Shalad and Tanagra. Just like your whole world is these little references. I think that if the story is good, it can survive on its own. And I'm not the only person to have said this, but that's step one. And the next question is, when you watch a movie, they've got car chases. There's action that pulls you in. If you think of Star Wars, that really old movie, the very first thing you're seeing is like a chase through space with these giant spaceships and droids. Like, who are these people and why are they shooting? That's a very common way to open, because it draws you in. You want to know, well, why are these people fighting? And then somewhere along the line, we need our exposition. We need to hear about what all this is, so we have more information regarding the action that's taking place. But what you don't see is both of those things happening at the same time. You don't get deep dialogue during car chases.
Right.
Because you overload the viewer. You need them to be able, if the story is important, then let them focus on the story. If the magic is important, let them focus on that. And so years ago, I made the decision that if I really had a story that I believed in, I would let it exist either before or after the effect that I wanted to tie it to. And I found that was a much better. And I'd also, because, people, again, skeptical, worried that by listening to your story, they're going to miss something. I would put a disclaimer up front and say, I'm not doing anything right now. I just want to tell you something. And then I'd be very fair with my hand. I wouldn't be holding my cards, riffling and, flitting around. Just tell them that story. And then look at them like a normal human being would, to see if they've got anything to give back to you. Put it out there the way it would be intended, where they're not some sort of tag-along magic trick. So let's go back to what I said before about my sister. So I've maybe done a magic trick or two, and then I pause. And I could say, when I was very young, I quickly discovered that I didn't have a whole lot of talent. Wasn't good at sports, wasn't the smartest kid. There's a lot of things that I knew I wasn't going to be. But when I found out I could do magic tricks, and, I found out that was something that I had a natural ability towards, an affinity, if you will, I decided that's what I wanted to be. And very quickly, we decided the Lex Luthor to my Superman was my older sister, who very much did not want to be fooled by a younger brother. And so forget about anybody else on this planet. There was only one person that I wanted to be able to fool, that I wanted to be able to make this work for. And because of the drive that came from that relationship, I got much better than I probably should have, were it not for her constant attempts to shoot me down. Now, that's a real story. It's not Romeo and Juliet. It's not story, but it informs how I got to where I am on some level. It gives people a puzzle piece. And at the same time, I'm not doing it as I do a trick. But it would work as a setup for just about anything that I'm about to do now that I would consider a deceptive piece. If I had a match and I turned it into a flower, probably not a good segue from what I just said, because I'm using that as reference because it's a little chunky piece of apparatus that I was laughed at when I got it as a mail order item. You got a spring-loaded thing and a match on the end of it, and you blow out the match and you pop the crappy little feather thing jumps out of your hand. And I always feel like massive deception. I am God. In David Blaine's next special. So when it comes to story, make sure you cast a wide net and recognize that is a story just as much as anything else. And that we communicate through stories, and we have probably, get back to our lizard brain, a long history of oral communication stories playing a large role. So we're probably wired to want good stories, but the problem is the magician comes in seeing the story as not the primary, as just some sort of a blanket to throw over stuff it helps hide my trick. But really it's too effective, because if they do listen to the story fully, they might lose complete track of the trick. Or, and what's more likely is they don't listen to your story and they just watch the trick.
That's been my feeling for a very long time about overlapping a story or a glorified presentation over a trick. Is they're only going to be able to focus on one of the two. Really deeply. Obviously, that they can pick up emotions and feelings in many ways, but for me, I find it very challenging to overlap the two, and I really resonate with the advice of if this is a story that is valuable to either your overall performance, who you are, or the trick itself, or whatever, tell it before. Tell it afterwards. There's variety in movies. There's variety in speeches. There's variety in theater, and all of them are made up of different parts. And people will get bored if we go trick, 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 trick. And they'll also get bored if every 3-minute trick requires a 9.5-minute story or tale that people need to know to hypothetically understand it.
I was not born to be a contrarian, but I evolved into the position. And I poke at language a lot. And part of what I find myself coming back to is when people say something and I feel like, ooh, that's a pretty large blankety statement, I like to get in there and be like, well, what about this? And so people will get bored if you just do trick, 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 trick. Maybe, but it might be possible. We've probably seen somebody who tells no stories, does nothing but trick after trick, and the audience loves them. So the question isn't, I must put stories and magic tricks together. It's, what do I want? Do I like telling stories? Then maybe I should tell some. Am I telling too many stories? Maybe, just feeling it out. And we will decide, are we a storyteller that does magic tricks or a magician that tells stories, mostly based on how much time we're spending in one area versus the other. But at the end of the day, what governs that balance is your passion. And just if you follow the winds of your passion and they take you sometimes over here and sometimes over there, you're always giving the audience the thing that you care the most about. And in that respect, you are being your best self. So let's forget for a moment that we're a magician or we're a storyteller or we're an entertainer or whatever, and just say, I'm a human being. And whatever flows from the honesty of performance is considered a win.
I know I said trick, trick, trick as being potentially not entertaining. I think it could be, but I guess what I was getting at is that, like, I'm trying to avoid blanket statements now, but I really do think variety is important, even as minute as it could be. It doesn't need to be full variety. You don't need to change your outfit. You don't have to tell a story. You don't even have to do a trick, anything like that. But I do think that variety is important to capture interest. And again, it could be miniature variety. It could be, I'm doing this trick, you're doing the next one, anything. But I guess that was what I was getting at, which is that, yes, we express the parts of ourselves.
What is the point of being a nitpicky, like, oh, you use this word, should have used that word? My only point, but it's a big one, is when we express things through the positive, that we tend to push ourselves in better directions. And so rather than saying, well, I can't just do tricks, which is framed through the negative, say, if I only do tricks, I'm not fully accessing other things that I could be bringing to the party. So maybe there's more on the table for me to bring in. What else can I bring in? And that is the empowering way of controlling self and self-learning, but also in teaching, to always find, whenever someone says something that is the negative statement, say, okay, well, what's the same thing but said through the positive? Let's get there.
You mentioned like the kind of thing that one should do is the thing that they end up expressing honestly, like who they're trying to express, what they are in a natural way. And I resonate with that because I've tried many things for long periods of time that don't click with the way that I am or like to be, and then have reverted back to the ways, and that's felt great. But I also find that sometimes there's limitations. Like a perfect example is what you said earlier about scripting on stage. So if you're on stage, it's more than likely that you're going to have a script, because every silence is important and every word is important and everyone's attention is focused on you. But if I'm somebody who naturally doesn't engage that way and naturally doesn't do any of the things in that way, am I shooting myself in the foot?
Well, are you going to be on a stage?
Let's say yes.
Okay, you're going to be on a stage and you don't feel like you're naturally good at writing scripts.
Yeah.
So the next step we say is, well, what are you naturally good at? Are you good at improvisation?
I think yes. I think I'm good at improvisation. I think I'm good at playing with other people.
So we recognize a core strength is the ability to work off of others. So we're going to put you on stage and we say, well, if I really want to give my best self, I should get someone up there with me, because I do well when I've got their energy to play with. And then the next thing is, what effect am I doing? Is there a certain direction that this will want to go? And because of that, I will script certain lines or actions that are the bones of what's going on. So it's got some lines that serve as an anchor, but certainly not everything in there is a word for word, this is what I always say.
Right.
But what we're doing is transitioning you from a point where you'd go out there and just winging it because I don't like writing stuff down,
right, to
a place where you've written some things down but aren't a prisoner to those words. And then as you go along further, you may find yourself going, wow, 80% of what I'm saying is the same night to night. But we didn't start there because, again, it's probably not going to work very well.
I know for me, like whatever I think is a script or whatever I think is what I'm doing, it is the bare bones that ends up evolving into the thing that ends up being the script.
That is probably the most appealing format for the average performer. Most people are going to fall into I'll put some things on stage and then pull out the panning for gold, shake the pan, take out the shiny parts, and scoop, shake the shiny parts, and eventually basket full of shiny parts. That's how we get to our good show. Now there are some people that can live in their own head and write a script and then rewrite that script, because it's very, very rare that the first thing you write down is anything like what you end up with at the end.
Totally.
But there are those who can conduct the experiment in their head, running it through and going, no, that's too wordy. Okay, that's it. And people that write screenplays and people that write for television or all these late night talk shows. I mean, the event happens, and that day they're kicking out these jokes and monologues, and then that gets pared down to what actually ends up on TV. But that's a process that you can quickly say, okay, what do we got to talk about? How do we make it funny? How do we format the sentence? Boom, there it is. So you can develop that skill, and the people in those back rooms aren't necessarily doing those jokes out loud for real people. They're just kind of walking through it. I mean, yeah, they do have a team and everything, but I think my comparison might be falling apart. But I'm saying that it may be possible to do these things all by yourself. My warning is this. So I'll go back to exercise, because it's a fun thing to talk about, in that I don't really do it, but I understand it enough that I feel like most people will be like, yeah, I kind of know that too. Let's suppose you decide, hey, I'm feeling fat and gross, and I want to go to the gym and lift weights and get better. And then all of a sudden, you split into two different realities. And one of you just goes to the gym and walks inside and looks at all the weird machines that you don't fully understand how to use, and just start picking stuff up and kind of imitating other people. And maybe you're doing it right, maybe you're not doing it quite right, but you're kind of in the ballpark, and you do it until you feel tired. But the other you goes online and does research and looks up and says, oh, well, what I really need to do is have a half an hour set. I'm going to do a full body split, and I'm going to do this, that, 4 sets of 10, this and that, with incremental weights, and then a cool down period. And you spend day after day documenting the way you're going to train once you go to the gym. Well, the version of you that just went there and lifted the heavy things and got tired is going to make more progress. So what we're looking for is a way to blend those two people. And you go, all right, something about the way I've been doing this deadlift is making my shoulder ache. So you go online, and you're like, oh, my form is all out of position. That's terrible. I should do it like this. And you look at, okay, this is this is what's going wrong, this is what's going right. So far, this kind of stuff feels good to me. I feel very weak in cardio, whatever. And then you start to decide, how much does that matter to me? How much do I need to get better in this area? So it is do a thing, and then look at it and pick out the gold, and then throw the gold back up on stage and just keep refining and adding little pieces to it. But neither one of these things tends to get to its final form without that other component. So performance without analysis, analysis without performance. You really kind of need to cycle. And also something that I feel, the first person I ever heard say this, but of course the second they say it like that, it's true. Jeff McBride said that in this circle of development, play is important. When you just dick around, just kind of like, I don't know, I'm going to pick up my cards and now we've got some rope and this and that. And just give yourself room to not care what you're doing and get in front of the camera or get in front of the mirror and just kind of walk through some stuff and go, well, that's kind of neat. Because again, it isn't so much that you'll invent the world's greatest trick or sleight or whatnot, but you're keeping yourself happy. And the mentality of feeling positive and I'm enjoying my practice time and this is what I got into it for is such a relevant player in how much progress you make.
Totally. I love that. And I love that it's like performance analysis and play, because we all know what it's like watching back ourselves on video and just wanting to bang our head against the walls because we thought it was bad, but really it's awful. And I love what you said, that the joy of it, the fun of it is so important to keep you doing it, that's why people recommend going to the gym with a buddy, because you both have a good time and you get to hang out afterwards and play Xbox or whatever nonsense. Gives you guys the fun to just keep doing it and keep showing up and making that progress together. There's a few different topics here that I wanted to touch on, kind of off the area that we've been on before we get to the wrap up. I know that you are a hardcore sleight of hand guy, technician in many ways. And one of the discussions we had before we press record is kind of that, you learn all of that stuff that maybe someday in coaching somebody, it might call upon you to do it. But obviously you don't necessarily use the most difficult move if there's a better one or easier one or whatever the case may be. And I wanted to use that lens to kind of talk a little bit about coin magic. I've been unfair in the way that I talk about coin magic, or rather in the language that I use, because I think a lot of the views that I have aren't too far off the mark, but I know from meeting some magicians who listen to this podcast in person that I use kind of strong language to express my feelings. So I guess I'll bring up one of the challenges that I have, and maybe you have some solutions. The challenge that I really have is, for the most part, if it's not in the first hand, it's in the other hand. Just because they don't see it doesn't mean they don't know where it is. And for me, all of the coin magic that I do, spoilers, use gimmicks, because I think that you got to show your hand empty and then you got to show the other hand empty. And if you can't be doing that, then I don't know. I think it's so limited. Coin magic is not limited. I take that back. It's so because you got two hands and three coins or whatever. It's often, I think, challenging to make it really fooling. And to be honest, I think a lot of magicians, when they show each other coin magic, are being nice to each other. Same as what we talked about, like, oh, I didn't see that card palmed in your hand. And it's like, yes, you did. And also similarly, I think oftentimes even lay people are being kind because you've got this whole coin magic dance routine, and they're watching it, and it's very beautiful and pretty and structurally lovely, but they do know that you're just holding out an extra coin. They might not know exactly where it is all the time, but they know that there's just an extra coin the whole time. So those are kind of my challenges with it, and I know that you have overcome them, and also you've got some feelings about the subject. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So the first thing that I would do is try to get upstream on this. So when you say coin magic, I hear small object magic. And when you bring yourself into that world, you're saying, well, what qualifies as small object magic? What would be a classic small object trick? Well, cups and balls comes to mind. If you negate the final loads, you have all of these things scooting around underneath covers. And if you brought that into the world of coin magic, you could probably say, well, Matrix is like that. You have covers and you have things underneath them and they move all around. When you talk about the things you don't like about coin magic, consider for a moment if I said, tell me the things you don't like about card magic. you'd probably have an equally long list. There's things like, well, that move doesn't make sense, and that always flashes, and you can't rely on that to work, and people always know you're doing this, even then they can't see it. So the things that you're pointing at about palming, extra coins, and such are fundamental to all of Magic. That you're going to find those to be the driving forces in all sorts of things. I don't think you'll find many people that say sponge balls or sponge bunnies doesn't play strong for them if they've got even a reasonable amount of technique.
Right.
And yet that's a small object kind of trick. Copper, silver, where I hold something and you hold something and they change places. Now, whether or not that's 2 coins or 2 different colored buttons or rocks that I pick up off the beach, that's kind of a miracle, right? You hold this, I hold this, suddenly now they change places. And I think the real reason that we have a beef with coin magic has a lot to do with the direction coin magic has taken as performance. You can kind of look at cardistry. It's almost entering into that world of it's more about what it looks like than figuring out how it works. And so you will get someone with a 3-minute long montage of one coin being shown to you, and then you don't see it anymore, and then you see it again, and then you don't see it anymore, and then repeat. And that is typically not good structure. There'll be beats within it that you'd be like, wow, that's a good looking vanish, or wow, what a neat looking production. But fundamentally, you could say, I think what's happening is he's showing it to me, and then he's hiding it from me, and then he's showing it to me again. And you would not be wrong. But good magic is not constructed that way. So you are correct to see it as, I don't like this because I feel like it's not deceptive. Right. But that's because you're being exposed to one particular interpretation of coin magic that I agree. I don't like any of that stuff as an entirety. Like, again, little bits. I'll be like, wow, look at that right there. That was genius.
Right. I will say, like, on the note of what you're saying, like, there are, maybe not the best word for it, but classical coin effects that I think are well designed that do pass that test. Like, I think a copper silver is one. I think certain matrices, like, there are certain coin effects that have that built into their structure. But yeah, I guess maybe it's just a lot of the coin magic that I'm seeing today that feels like a coin dance, like cardistry.
It breaks my heart because what I see is, especially those who are spending a lot of time online, I mean, we are monkey see, monkey do. That's what got us this far. And so if you get on Instagram and you find, oh, I kind of like coin magic, and you start linking yourself up to other people whose faces you don't see, who swirl about showing and hiding a coin, you start thinking that's the way it's done. And it's not. And there is very strong coin magic out there. I would point to Slidini slamming coins through the table as being a miracle point in my life. Like, what the hell just happened?
Totally.
And watching Al Flosso do Miser's Dream, where not only is he catching coins from the air, but moreover, they're appearing in this kid's pockets. This kid steps up on stage and you're like, look in the pocket. And a second ago, that pocket was empty and now he's got a coin there and it's in all of his different pockets. These things really do have a minor miracle feel to them. But the difference is, you'll notice how when I describe them to you, you think, well, I don't know how that would be possible. I mean, I got an idea, he must have put it there, but none of the weird little holding the coin behind my finger at a certain angle accounts for what just got described. And that's the whole point.
Totally.
You're building something with these tools that is hard to pull apart. Most of the time, what you're seeing is an exhibition of tools. I have this false transfer, and I think about it no further than showing it to you as a false transfer, which means when you look at it, you go, okay, it's not there, therefore, other hand, and done.
Right.
So to really get into the language of it, making a coin vanish is an effect. That is a solid thing. Remember David Blaine putting a quarter on the back of someone's hand and waving his hands over it. It's gone. Gasp. That's amazing. But a false transfer or anything where you momentarily affect a vanish that you don't have a follow through. So the answer is, I bet it's in the other hand, and you don't ever disprove that. Then yeah, that falls apart. Not a very good trick.
And I would say, like, it's only like David Blaine waving his hands over a coin on someone's on someone's hand like vanishing is only a great vanish, because then there's nothing in his hands. Like, he's not like weirdly holding one hand or like, you know, hitting the camera at an angle that it can't see the coin being held out in a hand. Like, it's because it's like gone and then gone.
There are things that we don't talk about very often, but exist within magic literature that's old and proven technique. So I will give you 2 thoughts that should be able to advance your small object magic. The very first one has to do with forward momentum. Let's suppose that there's a quarter on the table, and I pick it up, and I make it disappear via whatever false transfer that you want to envision. But when I open, I point back to the table, and there is the quarter sitting back on the table again. You're not searching for a coin anymore, but that's not the same coin. But that's okay, because I'm working one ahead. Again, a classic principle. So being able to leverage the vanish into a further phase of reproduction then cancels out the search for a missing object. Once it's accounted for, we've created resolution. The secondary thing I'd say is what's missing from a lot of modern day small object magic is wand cover. And wand cover, when I say it, wand, gross. But I don't actually mean a stick. I mean anything that you hold on to while palming. So when you develop an association between wanting to give your palming hand something else visible to hold on to, it could be your cell phone, you know? So you do your false transfer, you pick up your cell phone, you go boop, 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 and you say, I'm sending it, and then you open up the other hand, and then you point at the table where you've beamed it to. You got something to hang on to, giving that hand a reason to be shaped a little differently. Because remember, when you're not holding anything, they're comparing your empty hand to your palming hand. And so you need to work very, very hard to match them in terms of the way they move and the way that they hold tension. But as soon as you put something into your hand to hold on to, now you've given a reason for that hand to be shaped differently. And it's little things. None of these, like a spider's web, no single strand does the job. But when they interlace, they bear the weight of a much larger attack. The energy that comes in can be distributed through all these different lines. And so part of it is the fact that it was a very convincing false transfer. They really saw this in the other hand. And then the part of the fact is that you've accounted for it once it reappears. Like, hey, how did it get there? And part of the fact is that you were holding on to something. So the item that is palmed is just not drawing attention to itself like a crumply hand might, minus something to hold on to.
I think it's a great take on some of the challenges that I and many people have had with coin magic or modern coin magic. And I think it's good direction as to where to get started, whether that means like finding these existing well-structured routines, or that means like just making sure that your actions have motivations and you're not trying to make an empty hand look like a hand where you've got $4 palmed in it. Might be 2 great places to start.
Another thing to consider when it comes to palming is that there is a massive difference between an audience being in a neutral state and an audience being in an activated state of looking for a missing item. So I've heard you mention the $4 produced from a tie a few times, and I laugh. You know, but the thing is, even if you don't have a great classic, I'm assuming classic palm, you know, and you got stuff in your hands, kind of. If you do the experiment of walking through a room when people don't know that you're a magician, you're not trying anything, and you just mangle your hand in the worst possible classic palm, they don't even notice.
Nobody will know.
How many times have you noticed that someone's not even, you've known this person for years, they're missing fingers, and you didn't even notice? You know, so it's important to recognize that the people who will put something in print, maybe they're full of shit, but maybe this is actually a thing that you can do, because keep in mind, you hold your hands with the 4 coins palmed, albeit not great, but then once you get a hold of the tie, you've now got wand cover.
Right.
So just keeping your hand near and thumb clamped down and whatnot, you can probably get a lot of work done squeezing coins out from there and never have to let that palming hand be naked again.
Right, and pretend to be a hand with nothing in it.
Exactly. And so once a coin comes out, a person can think, well, maybe he had that in his hand. I'm watching closer now, but it's too late. You've already brought your heavily loaded hand into contact with this other thing and continue to squeeze out. So by the time that 4th coin shows up, they're like, okay, no way. Nobody can hold 4 coins in their hand without me noticing.
Right.
And so sometimes what seems like, oh, everybody's going to know I just gave them 2 sponge balls. Nobody knows. It's amazing how deceptive some of these blatant things are. I think like card under drink. Well, you just put it there when I wasn't looking. You'd think that would be their automatic response, but they're like, impossible.
Right. I think what you said about palming is a good thing to keep in mind about like sleights in general, which is like when it happens, when it's going on, plays such an impactful role in how well it gets hidden. And like a classic palm before your trick starts is gonna fly by so much more than if the coin just vanished and you're trying to pretend like your hands are empty. Like those are two entirely different moments. The last thing that I want to chat with you about as kind of a little aside before we get to the wrap-up questions is just sleight of hand in general and the necessity for difficult sleight of hand. I know that you love engaging in some of the really, really complex or challenging sleights, whether it's for your own personal pleasure or for research or whatever the case may be. And people have argued both sides of it, that, you know, you have to learn everything and how to be able to do everything so that you know what you can do. And then other people say, like, you know, when you're going to be performing, like that's not the time for you to be trying your, or even doing like your wildly technical, challenging, mechanical stuff. Like you should be focusing on entertaining. And I think the bar kind of lands somewhere in between those two things, right? You don't necessarily want to do your easiest stuff because you don't have, it might not be the most fooling, and you also don't want to do your most technically challenging, angly sensitive, whatever. So can you just touch a little bit on the difficulty of sleight of hand and how that should play a role in people's maybe effect selection or like method selection?
Going back to tricks that are very, very easy, maybe they're not fooling. Tricks that are very, very hard, maybe you don't do them well enough. I would land on the end of the scale that says it doesn't have to be hard at all, at least on a technical sleight of hand level. No one said you had to do sleight of hand.
Right.
So let's start there. So I'm going to say there's a guy, and his name is Rick. And Rick, at the ripe old age of 70, decides he wants to start doing magic tricks for his grandkids. And so Rick has partial arthritis, and he's not experiencing great cognitive difficulties, but he's not capable of memorizing a deck of cards. He doesn't think that's going to be something anytime soon. So he's got some limits on him. So do we say, sorry, Rick, you can't do fancy sleight of hand. You just don't get to be a magician.
There's still unlimited magic for Rick.
Unlimited magic for Rick.
Yeah.
Rick might be the world's most fantastic storyteller, might just emit warmth. People warm their hands around him like a campfire because he's such a great guy. And he does these little things with a cross-cut force. And everyone is delighted. And I feel like we, as Eugene Berger used to say, magic is a house with many rooms. And just recognize that just because you don't want to live in this room doesn't mean it can't have some other occupant, that people are living individual lives with different needs, different available time, different available passions. And the key isn't to say, hey, look, if you don't like the music that I like, you don't get to listen to music or you don't get to play. It's find the things that you love and then find a way to connect that to an audience. Going back to the bigger question of hard sleight of hand, I pursue hard sleight of hand because it's kind of like swinging 3 bats before you swing 1. That really, really working hard to get something down often makes going back to the things that are in the middle area feel so much easier and more reliable. And I am, even though not formally trained as it, I have an engineer's mind. I think all about like, okay, how reliable is this technique under what conditions? And is that going to be good enough?
Efficient.
Yeah. It's like building a bridge, right? I want to know that the bridge I'm building is going to support things going across it. I don't want it to collapse, just like in the middle of a performance. I don't want someone saying, oh, I saw that. So what can I sustain as a move as far as difficulty? And sometimes a move is difficult because of finger position and whatnot, but a lot of times a move is difficult because of angles. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I feel doesn't get talked about enough. But if you learn magic that is primarily of the Instagram design for a fixed camera from one perspective, and you go out into the real world and you start performing, you will have an unconscious bias towards a smaller audience. Meaning you start working for 1 or 2 people, and suddenly someone becomes interested and they walk up and you're thinking, go away, go away.
Right.
Which to me is antithetical to the whole process of wanting to entertain. So
totally,
I can think angly moves are nifty and applaud those that create them. But my beef comes in when no one puts the warning label of like, hey, it's probably better to start with things that you can do with someone on your left and your right and in front of you. And then if you've still got spare time and the passion to continue digging, yeah, throw in some of these neat little things that are only good when someone's on your right side. No problem.
Right.
But if that's all you got, you're really setting yourself up for a problem. The act of acquiring the tools feels like it's somehow making them better. Just like the act of buying exercise equipment makes you feel healthier, or the act of buying magic tricks makes you feel smarter. But the truth is, most of the time, it's disempowering. You feel guilty for having purchased these things and not put them to use. And suddenly now you're carrying around this baggage. And so when people say, should I watch this video or should I read this book? I tell them, practice.
Right. Probably neither.
Yeah. That the truth is, start with you. Get in front of that camera, or better yet, do the trick that you can do for somebody and feel the passion that comes from having performed, and then leverage that into some practice afterwards. But we feel like the act of staring at somebody else, listening to them talk, reading what they've written is somehow the best thing we can be doing. And I'm not saying it's worthless, but it's just, again, getting back to the gym. Like, go lift the heavy thing. Get in front of somebody, do a trick, then think about what you just did. Try to make it better next time.
I think that if the one thing that somebody takes from everything is just to not buy that trick they're about to buy and focus on the thing that they already have and just go perform.
You know, if I say don't buy those tricks, not helpful. If I say focus on yourself, focus on yourself, focus on yourself.
Before we get to the wrap-up questions, I just want to ask what it might look like if somebody hired you as a magic coach, because that might sound like a really foreign thing to somebody. To many of us, many people may not have even heard of that existing. So just very briefly, what would it look like if somebody hired you as a magic coach?
Well, I run my magic coaching a little different than some of the others, as you might expect. And the first thing I'd say is try them all. You know, there's several different magic online coaching systems. I'm live for the people in the area, and sometimes people fly in to see me. But for the most part, a good chunk of my business is online. And I feel like the core is the one-on-one I see you. You tell me what you like, who you've seen, and then what you want to do, where you want to go. And from that, we decide what goals to set for you. And my job is to get as much of the training into your own head so you can train yourself. You learn how to look for the good and the bad in your performance in a video. And then, you know, first, like, let's imagine you make a video for me and you're doing the ambitious card and you send me the video. Rather than pulling it apart and saying, all right, your tilt break is crap and that pass of yours has got to go, or whatever, I say, what do you see? And they say, you know, I feel like I'm making my tilt break way too big. And I thought my pass was better than that, and I'm kind of embarrassed now that I see it on video. And everything that I would have just told them, they just said for themselves. Well, now, what did they need me for? So the key is to figure out, okay, what can you self-assess? And then do you see how you're rocking back and forth? And like, oh, I totally didn't notice that. Well, now, see, I've got value. So we get into what I can see that you can't see yet. And then once I put you there and you start looking for that kind of a thing, and we just march right down the road and we start building out from wherever you are. And I have worked with people at every level. I have worked with people that are going to be appearing on television within the next few days, and we're just cramming together to get some material that's going to cut it for the special. And I worked with people that having serious physical, debilitating things. They're saying, I can't hold a little finger break. My finger just won't bend that far. I'm like, okay. And the key for me is to figure out, sometimes it's true, and sometimes people just think they can't do a thing because they've been trying it wrong, like trying to lift a carpet that you're standing on.
We've spoken so many times in this episode already about what working with others is like and working with a coach is like. And I think a good coach really acts like a mirror, right? So it allows you to see your own the things that, like, you know are there, but sometimes it takes the right question to put you in the right direction. And like you said, one idea, one little nudge can move you forward, can save you years, move you forward a ton, and then give you so much more room to do that self-analysis once again, because you're up on the next.
It is 100% nudge theory. Trying to overwrite someone's desires with your own, trying to impose your own sensibilities on other people, even if you manage to do it, I still don't think that's a great model to work from. But the thing I realized as an instructor is that I have these seeds. They come to me, and I don't necessarily know what they are, but I know how seeds work. So you put them in the ground, and you get them sunlight and you put the water on and you watch them grow and you realize, oh, this is a rose bush. And then you start to cultivate it in that direction. Or, oh, this is an ear of corn. Or whatever this thing is, that no matter how much I try, I can't turn corn into roses or vice versa. People come to you with a certain content. And it always bothers me when I feel like the instructor is overwriting the natural abilities of someone in order to just impose who they are. So it's on those of you who act as instructors to think, are you fanning the flames of the passion of the person in front of you? But it's also on you, the student, whomever you are, to think about what it is that you want and where you want to go and be actively paying attention, because if you only imitate one person, you look like an imitation of them. But if you pull from many different sources, you become a composite that is then unique. So just keep looking for the things that are going to help you move forward and the people that will help you get there.
It's course correction. It's helping you get back on track and whatever that track is for you. And everyone's is different. So I love that. I'm hoping that some people take you up on this because it's really exciting. And I know you've worked with some of the best. Let's get towards the end of the episode where we have some wrap-up questions that we ask each and every guest. Clearly, you already know my idiosyncrasies. You're a listener of the podcast, so I'm sure you know what's to come. But let's start with the endless chain. So in order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest that would be fantastic on the show. The only two caveats, there used to be one, but now that there's 200 episodes, the only two caveats are, number one, I can't have had interviewed them already, and number two, you have to be able to put us in contact. So who might you think would be fantastic to be featured on this podcast?
Well, I got two names that are kind of floating around in my head, and it's funny because I feel like they're on opposite ends of my magic chain. So Al Schneider, the creator of Matrix, brilliant man, really a deep, insightful thinker, but also kind of a recluse. So my connection to him is an email, and sometimes he answers and sometimes he doesn't. So I might be able to get a hold of him. Otherwise, Nick DeFont, I don't believe you've had him yet.
No, I have not. I would love to.
What a time to catch him. The kid's obviously on the way up, and he just put out the book. Funny.
100%. Mm-hmm. Which is great, which I have, and it's awesome.
I started working with Nick when he was 8 years old, I think, and he's now in his early 20s. And he always had that kind of shine in his eye, like he was going to be great at whatever he took on. So I could tell he had natural talent. And so there was encouragement on my part, and we talked about magic theory and design and tricks and performance and everything. And I was part of the creation of his first stage show. But when he told me that he didn't like doing stage, and I said, why? And he said, well, the other kids don't really like me. And I was like, why would you work for other kids? Because he was already so funny for adults. And so when he did his first stand-up show, I wrote, 90% of the lines in the staging. He'd picked out the tricks that he wanted to do, and we kind of put them in an order. And about a year later, it was about, maybe 50-50. I had some lines, he had some lines. Maybe a year later, I had maybe 10%. I couldn't pay him to put a line that I wrote in his shows now. I mean, he's gone on that journey. And he was going to be successful with or without me. But I was still able to play some kind of a role, just if nothing else, as encouragement. And I put that out there not because of me, but because everybody who's listening in one form or another can offer something to the magic community. And it might be insight into a particular move. It might be an observation that affects a lot of performers, or it might be just some kind of general encouragement. Sometimes somebody comes up and says, man, I just love the way you do whatever. And that counts for something. So as a magic fan, you have a power. But just to look for what you can put back into things, it feels good to give.
That's a great message for people to hold on to. And I say this a lot, but part of the reason why this podcast exists is because I felt limited in my ability to give methods, where all the great magicians in my area were gifting their incredible methods and their brilliant new tricks. And that just was not where my strength lied. It lies in analysis and in other areas. And that's why this podcast exists. And I'm grateful that I'm able to give the thing that I'm good at without trying to shoehorn the stuff that I'm not that good at in hopes to give something back to the world of magic. So yes, give what you are good at, what you can, and sometimes that's just a pat on the back and a welcoming people into your community or anything of that nature. The next question is about modern magic. What is something right now that you like about magic, something in the 2020 world of magic that you like, and something in the 2020 world of magic that you don't like?
In many ways, we've already kind of touched into this, but I just reiterate that what I like is that more so than ever, we have people working hard to make things better than what they were. So innovations, especially in the world of sleight of hand, ideas bouncing around the globe. You know, something comes out and you're like, well, that's neat. And within a year, there's a variant of it that's even better. Like, whoa, that would never happen in the olden days. And then the problem, of course, is that all of these neat thoughts, techniques, and whatnot get leveraged into somewhat terrible effects that we've lost a lot of our clarity of what qualifies as a miracle. I mean, think about it. Maybe about 100 or so years ago, you go to a magic show and the guy would get someone on stage, reach under their jacket, and pull out a live chicken. Like, that's a hell of a thing, you know? and you're like, no, look at me show and hide the coin a bunch. It's just, you work harder than chicken guy for way less of the results. So I'm not against working hard. I like the idea of working hard. In some ways, being able to do a difficult thing, and let's face it, sleight of hand difficulty is usually about an efficiency of like, now I can do all of this with one deck of cards or with an examinable rope or whatever this thing is. It avoids the weakness that comes with a gaff. So I'm not against gimmicks. I just know that before I was in magic, I assumed like I'd never seen it. Everything is a gimmick, right? Like if I saw cups and balls, I would assume it's a mechanical table with little pistons inside that shove things up. And you couldn't tell me otherwise unless it was my table.
Right.
And so being able to do sleight of hand is like coming at it from a whole other angle. But of course, people do suspect sleight of hand if you are transmitting guilt and doing things that make it smell like that. So it is a matter of things that are hard are not always hard just based on finger placement. It's like the timing and the eye contact and the motivation and all these other little spider web layers that you build in so that the moment that it happens, it doesn't feel like anything happened.
Fabulous. The second last thing is the take-home point. So people have been listening to us talk about magic for an hour and a half plus now, and many different areas of magic and ways that they can grow and get better. If people are going to think back to this episode and take home just one thing, what would that thing be for you that you think would be the most valuable?
You'd think I would have planned for this answer, but the truth is that all of my teaching kind of comes down to me saying the same thing over and over again, so I don't feel particularly off balance here. It is the mindset with which you teach yourself and others. That the framing of things in the negative is typically disempowering. It can give you an insight. Like you say, I don't like coin magic. The next thing you say is, but why? And if coin magic has existed for so long and there are classic tricks that have worked around the world for all these different attorneys, what's there that I'm not seeing? And so press on these things in the negative, and then you start going, oh, well, what it really points down to is I like coin magic where the effect is clear and the methodology is strong and this and that. And you go, oh, okay. So you start making it a format of how you learn and express yourself, that you do it through the positive. And so if you go, oh, my sleight of hand sucks and I'll never be as good as Ben Earl and I'll never be this. Well, you know what? Most people won't. Most people that play guitar aren't going to be as good as X-famous guitar, Eddie Van Halen. That doesn't mean you can't be the guy that plays the guitar well enough that when we want to have Happy Birthday, we sing it, or Brown Eyed Girl, everybody sings around the campfire. There is a place to be okay at something. And you probably have a memory of a time when you were somewhere and somebody put on a puppet show, or they did some improv theater, or they did some kind of thing, and it wasn't the world's greatest whatever that thing was, but you loved it because of where you were and how it came about. And you could be that person. So don't sell yourself short because you're not the best at it. Just recognize what you can do and continually work to make that thing better. And you make it better based on where your passion is, because people can smell a liar and they can tell when you're just throwing something out there to fill space and when it really comes from some place where you care about it.
Authenticity trumps all. I love that. I think that's a great take home. And the last thing is plugs. Where can people find you and where should people go if they want to work with you?
Good question. I have a very odd business model. I don't work to put myself out there because I get enough word of mouth business. And I've always been kind of on that edge of I can only handle so many people. But you can find me on strongermagic.com. That's my representative website right now, which I try to maintain now and again. And you can see me in some of the inserts that I've done for Real Magic magazine. So I did a few things for them. What a fantastic thing there.
Yeah, it's great.
And again, look at Cosmo. Here's a guy who's just wanting to put something out. Look at you. You wanting to put something out. When I got into teaching, I just recognized I'm sitting here thinking about what could make something better, and I'm not saying it out loud. And what does that make me if I'm not giving it back? I think about, like, let's suppose, Stephen Minch, the guy behind Hermetic Press, put out the Books of Wonder and other things. Let's just suppose for a moment that he's a terrible magician. I haven't seen him perform anything, but for the sake of this, let's just suppose he is. Does it make any difference? He's changed my life possibly more than anybody else because the books that I got are fantastic. So that's what he brought into my world. Maybe you can run a convention. Maybe you can have a podcast and get people on, whatever it is. Maybe you can just make a child smile. But find the thing that you can do, find the passion for what you want to do, and just keep making that thing better.
Awesome. And I think with that, a fabulous place to wrap up and a fabulous message for everybody to keep with them. Tyler, thank you so much for this. This was a real highlight episode for me. And I think one of the things I like to keep reiterating is I love bringing on magicians of different varieties, but really secretly, I bring on the magicians to help me with the things that I am struggling with at that time, in that moment. So you've more than done that, and it's really valuable to bring you on. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and sharing it with all of us.
Thank you for, first of all, having me here, and second of all, just doing what you're doing. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. The idea that you have people on to help you, because that's what helps keep this grounded in some sort of a needful thing. If you didn't care what anybody was saying and you just let them come on and blab, I think it would have less integrity to the project.
Thank you so much. And of course, a thank you to everybody at home who listened in, joined us for this episode, learned a thing or two, and is going to put it into practice. So thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next Thursday. Peace. Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. Use this opportunity to make a note. If you're driving, don't crash, but make a note of the thing that you learned in this episode, the thing that really stuck out to you. And instead of you just getting all excited about having learned it, I want you to implement it. Whether it's today, whether it's this week, put it into action and put it into practice. That's how you're going to get better, and I really hope that you do, because this was action-packed. As always, thanks for being here. It means the world. Share it, spread the word, tell a friend. It's the only way the word gets out about what is going on here and this large, unlimited, free resource for you. So spread the word, share it, tell a friend. It means the world sincerely. And I'll see you next Thursday.